Well, hello, future scientists. I am Mr. Miller, and we're going to talk today about different types of symbiotic relationships. What are symbiotic relationships? Well, first of all, let me adjust my camera. Symbiotic relationships are relationships that organisms in nature form with each other over time to help each other survive. Now, when I say help each other survive, it's not like one animal saw another animal struggling and said, oh man, I should really do something to help this other animal. That's not how it works. In fact, all these animals are all acting selfishly. It's just sometimes when two or more animals are acting selfishly, but each other's selfish actions, just by coincidence, end up helping the other animal, then that is what forms a symbiotic relationship. Okay, so the animal isn't going out of its way to help something else, but in fact, it's just acting in its own self-interest, and by doing so, ends up just by coincidence being beneficial to something else. Or it's not always beneficial, as we're about to learn. Okay, so let's just get into it. So there's 5 different types of relationships in nature that animals and plants or even microorganisms like bacteria and fungi and different things can have with each other. Okay. There's mutualism, parasitism, commensalism, predation, and competition. Now, these top 3, mutualism, parasitism, commensalism, these are 3 types of what we call symbiosis or symbiotic relationships. And that word symbiotic, if we break this down into its root words, we have sim and we have bio. Sim, the word sim means together, and bio means life or to live. So we're talking about living together, or in other words, living together. That's the key word there. They're living together. So one does not necessarily die. In the relationship, neither one in the relationship necessarily is guaranteed to die. But in these other 2 down here, predation and competition, they are not necessarily, well, one is always guaranteed to die, predation, and then the other one, they're not acting in each other's self-interests, or no one's really benefiting. So that's why it's not symbiotic. In symbiotic relationships, someone, at least one of them, is always benefiting, and it's not a guarantee that the other one is going to die, or that's not the intent anyway. Okay. So let's look at these 3 first. So let's look at the symbiotic relationships first. We got mutualism, parasitism, commensalism. In every situation, in every type of relationship, at least one is happy. So it's always going to be happy something. So in mutualism, they're both happy. This is what I like to call happy, happy. And an example is crab and algae. Okay, so these algae can actually grow on the backs of a crab that's down at the bottom of the seafloor. And the algae will actually camouflage the crab and help the crab to blend into its environment, not only to escape predators, but also to be able to sneak up on their prey. So camouflage is key, and the algae help the crab. So the crab are happy because they're getting camouflaged, but the algae are also happy because by being on the crab and growing on the crab, if a fish comes along and tries to eat the algae, the crab will scare away the fish or eat the fish. So they're both happy. That's a win-win. Happy, happy, that's mutualism, okay? Parasitism is happy, sad. Obviously, the parasite is happy. You guys know what parasites are probably, but a parasite feeds on a living host, right? So the parasite's going to be happy, but the host is going to be sad. Like if I get a tapeworm, the tapeworm is happy, but I am sad because I have a tapeworm, and it's doing a disservice to me. It's making me feel bad. So dogs and fleas are a common example of that. Commensalism, that's happy meh. If you don't know what I mean by meh, I'm saying you're not happy, you're not sad, you're just meh. Like, hey, how was your food? Meh. How was that movie? Meh. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It's just meh, right? So in commensalism, one is benefiting and the other one is relatively unaffected. Or in other words, they can do with or without. Okay. This is a shark and a remora, for an example. Sharks, we know what sharks are and what they do. The remora are a fish that actually have this little suction cup built into their backs and their heads. So they actually kind of suck up underneath the shark. And when the shark swims, they just kind of hitch a ride. Okay. And when the shark eats something, all the little crumbs and leftover bits that come off of the dead fish that the shark just ate, the remora just kind of swims off, cleans up the crumbs and feeds off of the leftovers, and then sucks back up and just waits again. So the shark is not really benefiting or being hurt either way. So he's kind of meh. And the remora, though, is happy because he's getting free meals, right? He doesn't have to do any work. So that's a happy meh. So then we get down to the non-symbiotic relationships like predation and competition. And these are pretty self-explanatory. Like predation, that's predator-prey, like a lion and a gazelle. One is eating the other, okay? Competition, that is no predation, but there are limited resources. So one is not necessarily eating the other, but they are competing for the same resources. Like if you have two birds and these birds both eat the same type of fruit, then those birds will compete over that one piece of fruit, right? There's one apple and two birds, only one's going to get the apple, okay? So there's actually different kinds of competition. There's what's called interspecies competition and intraspecies competition, okay? So the word inter, there's a lot of Greek and Latin root words. That's, biology is based in Greek and Latin. So all these words mean something. They just mean something in a different language. The word inter means between, or in other words, between two different things. And intra means within, like within the same thing. And what we're talking about is species. So interspecies competition is competition between two different species, like blue jays and cardinals, two different species of birds competing over the same resources. Intraspecies would be two blue jays competing with each other over these resources. Okay, so there's kind of both going on at the same time. All right, so competition doesn't necessarily mean between different animals. It could be within the same group if there's limited enough resources. So I want to go back over here and I want to do an example and kind of work through an example of problem that you might see. So we have 4 relationships, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a description of each of the relationships. And what you should do in these situations is you should, first of all, highlight or underline or circle the animals or the organisms. It's not always animals, it could be plants too, that are involved in this relationship, and then find out who's happy, who's sad, who's meh, or is one getting eaten, or are they competing for resources? So there's 5 different relationships that they could be. So let's work through each of these 4 and find out what they are. So number 1, a lion, so there's an organism. A lion stalks, captures, and eats a Cape buffalo. Okay. So you might think, well, this is a happy sad because the lion is happy he got food and the Cape buffalo is sad because he died. But remember, um, those are symbiotic relationships. This is not a symbiotic relationship. These two things are not living together. One is dying. And so it's not a symbiotic relationship because one is getting eaten by the other. So this is a predator prey, which is a predation. Number two, we have a tapeworm enters the digestive system of a human and consumes the nutrients in the intestines so that they are not available to the human. So if you know anything about tapeworms, you know that they are no bueno for people, right? Or for anything for that matter. These are parasites. The tapeworm is happy because they're getting nutrients and food, but the host is getting food and nutrients taken away from them. So that is a happy sad. And as we should remember, happy sad is parasitism. So number two is parasitism. Number three, a cattle egret, that's a bird, follows cattle around and eats insects disturbed by the movement of the cattle. So insects. And also cattle. Okay. But the cattle are unaffected. So the bird follows the cow around, and you've probably seen this if you've seen a field of cows, those little white birds that sit on the backs of the cows. They just kind of hitch a ride. It's kind of funny to watch actually, because the cows are just like so whatever, and the birds are just sitting there chilling on top of the cow. And so as the cow is going around grazing through the field, the little insects in the grass, they get stirred up, and the birds will then eat the insects, right? So the cattle are unaffected. So the cattle are meh. The birds are happy. So this is a happy meh between the bird and the cattle, which is, remember what happy meh is? Happy meh is commensalism, okay? So number three is commensalism. Between the bird and the cow is commensalism, but what would it be if it were between the bird and the insects? Well, the birds are eating the insects. This is a predator-prey situation. So between the bird and the insects would be predation. But the question is asking about the bird and the cow, so we're going to say commensal. I'm just telling you the other part, just so you know. Okay, so there's a couple different things going on here. And number four, a green anole, that's a lizard. You've seen them, probably seen them running around on the outside of your house. I know down here in Texas we have those. And a brown anole use the same resources to survive in a vacant yard near a pond. Okay, so we have green anole and brown anole. They are using the same resources. Now, no one is eating each other. There's not a happy, 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 sad, happy, meh. So it's not a symbiotic relationship because one's not necessarily benefiting. No one is necessarily benefiting, and no one is eating each other. So if no one is necessarily benefiting, and we know that all the symbiotic relationships, at least one always benefits, we know it's not any of these three, and it's not predation because no one's being eaten. So it must be competition, which makes sense because they use the same resources to survive in the same area. So they must compete with each other for those resources. So that is a competition. All right. So just remember, when you're looking at these problems, find out what organisms are involved. Find out if someone is benefiting. If one of the two is benefiting, then you know that it's one of the three symbiotic relationships. You know that it's either mutual, parasitism, or commensal. If no one's necessarily benefiting, well, in predation, I guess you could say somebody's benefiting. But if somebody's being eaten, then you know it's predation. But if no one's getting eaten and no one is necessarily benefiting, then that's competition. Okay. All right. That's it. I hope you learned something.